Welcome to Diabetes Day by Day, the American Diabetes Association's official podcast. This is the start of 2024. We hope you've had a safe and happy holiday season. The new year is often a time for reflection on the previous year, thinking about successes, and also thinking about challenges that we have coming up. For some, it's a time of goal setting, which can be a little bit intimidating. For today's episode, we want to talk about how we might approach a variety of aspects of going into the new year through a lens of self-compassion and appreciation for who we each are as individuals. I'm Dr. Neil Skolnik, Professor of Family and Community Medicine in the Sidney Kimmel Medical College of Thomas Jefferson University, and joining me is my co-host.
I'm Dr. Sarah Wettergreen, an assistant professor at the University of Colorado Skaggs School of Pharmacy and an ambulatory care clinical pharmacist.
And today we have two guests joining us. They've both been part of our podcast before. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Bill Polonsky. Dr. Polonsky is president and co-founder of the Behavioral Diabetes Institute, the world's first organization dedicated to studying and addressing the unmet psychologic needs of people with diabetes. He's also an associate clinical professor in medicine at the University of California, San Diego, and, don't tell anyone, one of the wisest people I know. Welcome back, Bill.
Nice to be here, Neil. Thank you.
Also joining us today is Dr. Sean Oser, who is a diabetes researcher and clinician. He's director of the Practice Innovation Program at the University of Colorado School of Medicine, associate director of the Primary Care Diabetes Lab, and an associate professor in the Department of Family Medicine. His career is dedicated to diabetes care and research, and he is quite familiar with this topic because, Sean, you also have type 1 diabetes. Is that right? And welcome.
Thank you. Yes, it is correct. And I appreciate the invitation to be back. It's great to see you again, Neil and Sarah, and also you, Bill. Thanks.
Well, to start off the conversation, if we're going to talk about the new year and goal setting, then we can't help but think of resolutions, and it's probably only fair that I share what I do. And to be honest with everyone, I don't really see New Year's as any different than any other time of year. I am regularly creating goals for myself and just as regularly disappointing myself in not being quite as good at carrying them out as I wish I could be. Then I wake up the next morning and I start all over again. That's my personal experience. Bill, any thoughts?
Well, that's pretty typical, right? I mean, that's what happens to a lot of folks. It's one of the reasons we worry about people setting goals for the new year's. It's oftentimes an opportunity just to, well, get disappointed quickly. So when you're trying to set goals, it's important to be thoughtful and careful about it too.
I do like that. And I remember last year we had a conversation. It's so important not to think of the new year as that one opportunity and to set those goals too high and unachievable. We want to be realistic. Now, for people living with diabetes, there are often diabetes-specific goals. We each have goals in different areas of our life. Sean, can you share with us how you approach and how you recommend to your patients to approach setting diabetes-specific goals?
Sure. Yeah, I think setting attainable goals obviously is really important, and I try to not castigate myself too strongly when I disappoint myself on those goals, but also not praise myself too strongly either when I achieve them. I think diabetes never goes away. And it's really, this is, I think, perhaps a frequently used cliche, but I still think it rings true that it's a marathon, not a race. And it's important to pay attention to those goals all the time. One of the ones that, or one of the approaches, I guess, that has been most useful for me since I feel like my life and my diabetes life especially was changed with the introduction of continuous glucose monitoring, is being able to have multiple different metrics rather than just being focused on an A1C every few months and having everything seem to boil down to that one number. And I really love that I get weekly feedback, especially from my my CGM reports on multiple metrics, and at any given time, maybe I'm achieving some of them, but not all of them. And I appreciate that type of feedback. But it's also that it's weekly. It doesn't come down to just New Year's, and I can get a sort of a frequent pulse check on things.
Bill, I see you thinking.
Uh-oh, that's always a problem. I guess I just want to highlight something, if I can talk about broad strategies just for a moment.
Yeah.
Listening to you both made me think about this, that probably the most important thing to consider when you're talking about goal setting is to be very careful about making sure that you are making, well, sometimes it's called making wise goals. But what I really mean by that, what's most important, are you selecting a goal that you want to do or that you want to reach? That the biggest mistake people make is they set expectations or goals, things that they're trying to that they hope they're going to accomplish, but they don't really want to. They're not things that really are what we say are intrinsically motivating for them, not important. So I listen to Sean saying, yeah, I want to make sure my time in range is awesome every week. I'm sorry, Sean, I'm speaking for you here. I know he's saying that because that's personally important for him. But oftentimes when we talk about, well, making goals for other people, we forget that we really need to spend some time thinking about, is this something that's meaningful and important for me that I really want to accomplish? And we must not skip that step.
I like that approach a lot, Bill. I am someone who is big into goal setting, especially around the new year. So I am different than you, Neil, in that. I just like to have one long list at the beginning of the year and look at the failures at the end and see what I did accomplish. But typically each year I'll set a reading goal for myself. So 23 books in 2023, 24 books in 2024. And looking at that, one of my friends acknowledged and said, well, the ultimate goal is to read more. I don't think you need to knock yourself down for only reading 22 books instead of 23 last year. So you're totally right. I think it's that focus on what is the actual purpose of the goal. And are you doing that even if it's not exactly the number? So if your next goal is to move more, maybe you fall a bit short of your ultimate goal on paper, but if you are moving more, you're making progress toward the ultimate outcome. So I really like what you said there, Bill.
Bill, can I ask you a question? It strikes me that the goal setting, the way that you've described, is really a very introspective phenomena. Are there ways that you can think of that might be helpful? One thing that comes to mind for me is talking to some people that are close to me.
I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. I do think it is more powerful when you're trying to set some sort of, I'm going to say, a behavioral goal, that if you're sharing it with others, that is to some degree making some kind of commitment. And that's very different from just sort of saying to yourself, and Sarah, of course, is a big exception because she can pull this off on her own. But for most people, it is more powerful to know that someone else is aware of what your goal is and can be your, your attaboy, someone who's rooting for you and is cheering you on. And that can be incredibly powerful. So that part of it is really meaningful and important, I think.
That's a really good point. I'm intrigued by your idea of that intrinsically important goal. And I think for many of us, I'll speak for myself, it really requires a lot of thought to figure out what that is.
Yeah, I can tell you with my patients, I spend a lot of time focusing on exactly that kind of issue where I end up asking the question, why a lot? I'd want to, I'm a good psychologist, I'd be exploring that with you. Why? What's in it for you? Why would that be worth it for you? And the point is, this falls from motivational interviewing. The point is, in that conversation, my goal is to help you convince yourself that, you know what? I really want to do this. So as you get excited about it, or what we could call intrinsic motivation, you're way more likely to actually pull this off successfully. And we can't skip that stage, is what I'm saying. We really need to spend some time hanging out with ourselves or with someone else and let that oomph blossom before they set out.
I think we're going to use that as one of the snippets, let that oomph blossom, when we put this on social media. Sean, you had thoughts?
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, Bill, and especially, making the connection to motivational interviewing. And I feel like sometimes I try to go at it from the opposite direction. So to say, because I agree, a lot of people have these extrinsically motivated goals, right? So I used A1C as an example already, but I feel like a lot of people have an A1C focus, but they also feel like by extension, it's me that they're trying to please as their doctor, right? And Neil, I'm sure you've experienced this also, and Sarah, and Bill. I know you're all active clinically, but so I try to move that to why are you so concerned about pleasing me? Ultimately, the reason I'm interested in your A1C, the reason I'm interested in any of these numbers that we can measure, is that it comes down to how can we best ensure your health, and how can we protect your health, and how can we set you up to be as successful as possible and as healthy as possible for as long as possible. And the movement from an A1C or a blood pressure or an LDL cholesterol level to actual meaningful outcomes is something that isn't so easily accomplished with motivational interviewing, but helping connect the dots, I think, for people can be helpful.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That connecting the dots, which we do so easily, the curse of knowledge, things that we know as health professionals and we assume others do, is a trap we shouldn't fall into to help the patients connect the dots. Here's why you do this. It helps you avoid retinopathy years down the road, a heart attack, et cetera. Sarah?
Yeah, exactly. I think about that a lot with weight as well. So some people, especially in the new year, might set a goal related to changing their weight. And I think while that can be a component of what we're thinking about in terms of overall diabetes related health, and maybe that helps lower your glucose in some other ways, let's think about the process to get there. Let's think about what are the patterns we're setting up to get to the point where that's naturally happening. Is it getting more movement? And what does that movement look like? And how does it feel? And what are the other long-term goals of movement? Well, maybe you want to have more mobility or just feel stronger so that you can do your usual activities with more ease. Different eating patterns. I think feeling more energy from the foods that you're taking in. So just trying to piece all those things together. Well, maybe the long-term thing that you might see at the end, you might have a change in weight, but what happened along the way and how were those goals part of the picture? Because if it's all tied to the number, you could take somewhat unhealthy approaches to get to that end result. So we'd rather see the healthier approach and then find that outcome later.
Yeah, Sarah, you mentioned physical activity, and we know that the ADA Standards of Care recommends regular exercise. They set a goal of 150 minutes a week of moderate to vigorous intensity aerobic activity every week. It should be spread over 3 days, no more than 2 consecutive days without activity, also 2 days a week with resistance exercises. Even just saying that, I'm getting tired. And Bill, I wonder if you could share a few thoughts about you have these aspirational goals, these guidelines that say what you should do. How do you get there?
And by the way, speaking of physical activity goals, what will soon be true for all of us, and don't forget, don't sit too long either. We should be getting up every hour and moving around. So it's just that list is just gonna get longer and more complicated. Again, I think I would do what all of you would do, and I think that's what Sean was speaking about. That we sit with folks and think through with them the why, right? So I'm not going to sit with my patient and say, "Hey, let's agree that you walking an hour a day is a good idea," right? Right, Mrs. Smith? Don't you think so? So we need to start to where she's coming from, whether she sees that as potentially useful, and she may say, "I don't think it's valuable at all." So I may chime in, right? Saying, well, my usual thing is I'll usually start by saying, well, I know you're interested in living a long and healthy life. And if you're going to achieve that, what are the things that you do to try to make that happen? What are what we call the bang for your buck list? What are the most potent things that you could do that are going to help you achieve that end? And most people say, well, I should, maybe drink more water, or I'm not really sure. So we'll make it a little bit more of an educational session. And I think that's similar to what you're saying, Neil. Sometimes I want to spend some time saying, actually, there's some pretty simple things you could do that could really help you achieve what you're telling me really is your goal. And that might mean something like starting to figure out a way to put exercise, more regular physical activity in your life every day, which is incredibly hard for folks. But it's I got to find that oomph. Got to make the oomph blossom before we go any further. And what we see over and over and over again is how individuals and healthcare providers skip that step. They just go right to saying, you need to do this because I'm telling you need to, and here's why.
I think that's the beauty of being individuals too. Anytime I'm talking with someone who's living with diabetes and talking about movement goals, I'll say something like, what type of movement do you like? And everyone has such different answers. I might default to saying, let's start going for walks and see where that gets you, because we got a lot of people who like to walk and it's an affordable way to get some movement in. But maybe you like dancing or swimming or gardening, or if you live in a snowy place, maybe you're getting movement by shoveling snow these days. There are so many different ways that people enjoy and find ways to get that movement in, and it doesn't have to look the same for everybody. And I actually think that's the beauty of it completely, is you get to design exactly what that looks like for you. Whether that day is going to be a day where you're getting that more aerobic activity, or is it a resistance day? Are you doing some other mobility exercises and getting some yoga or tai chi in? There are so many ways to get that in, which is kind of the exciting part too, where it's not limited to just one way. Sort of when we think about making our plates for meals, we don't all have to eat the same every day. We don't all have to get the same types of exercise in to be healthy. Sean?
Yeah, I think that you reminded me of something that has become increasingly important to me to try to remember, which is that movement is movement. And I like that word much better, I think, than exercise, although I still tend to use exercise more often. Activity too is fine, but the quick story of a participant in a research study that I was participating in recently, that involved increasing physical activity and logging it. And the participant was a groundskeeper at a large public institution somewhere, and was active all day long. That was his job. And he was feeling very guilty that he wasn't achieving his goal, speaking of goal setting, of exercising 30 minutes. Because he was too busy with work, moving around all day long, that he didn't have time when he got home from work to exercise. And I think that we need to be more mindful of pointing out to people, you're moving probably more than you realize. Give yourself credit for what you're doing. And we need to be more inclusive of those kinds of things. I do need to stand some more, right? I do need to get more movement. But I should be taking credit for what I do, which there's one thing I would love to see change. I'm not going to name any brands, but there's the one smartwatch I'm familiar with the most, that you can track your activity on, et cetera. And you can choose the type of workout that you're doing. And I look through, because it's got dozens and dozens of different types of workouts, but gardening is not there. Shoveling snow is not there. Shoveling gravel or anything like that, vacuuming, it's not there.
Raking leaves, yeah. All
Yeah.
those things you might do as a groundskeeper.
Yeah. And I think those should be there, right? People who are vacuuming, people who are gardening, are moving, and we need to be able to give them credit for that work.
Yeah, it's so often I feel like if I use that term specifically, exercise, people have a different response, or feels like it has to look and feel a certain way when you're doing that compared to movement. So I like that too, Sean.
Can I chime in? I and back up a little bit, because there's sort of three different things you guys are talking about. I just want to make sure we can have them in the right bucket. So first of all, there's these broad goals that people often have for themselves. And we've already heard that from some of those from you. And those goals are typically what we call outcome goals. Like, I'd like to be a better reader, or I'd like to feel healthier, or if I'm smart enough to see a great physician like Sean, I really want to get my time in range in a better place, or my LDL down. And to accomplish that, we want to have behavioral goals, right? So I'm going to read 23 books, or I'm going to, check my weekly AGP report, because Sean told me about it from my CGM, so that I can really see whether anything's working or not, right? Or I'm going to make sure I buy healthy foods. I'll actually have it in my house, might actually help me to eat it. So sort of simple moment-to-moment behavioral goals to help me accomplish there. Or if I think exercise is important, like walking, maybe I should make sure I go buy a pair of shoes. But you're bringing up a third bucket of what I want to mention, which is, once people start some sort of goal, how do they stay with it? What's sort of their personal attaboys? And that's when you talk about the feedback goals, right? Not goals, but the feedback. And so, we know that Sarah gets feedback because at the end of every December, she counts how many books she's read. And she goes, oh, look, I almost made it to 25 this year. And, Sean pulls it off because he checks his AGP report, his CGM report at the end of every week. So how do we help other folks do that? Some people, if they're in exercise, again, they might have a watch where this actually either hopefully giving them right type of feedback or not. But I agree. I think it's super important, and we have to be smart about how we can provide people in more creative ways with the kind of personal feedback everybody needs to make them feel enthused about keeping it up, because that's often missing.
Yeah.
Bill, you're opening up, of course, as you tend to do, another huge area, which is how do we communicate with people, and how can we do it better, right? We, at least when I trained, which is getting longer and longer ago now, there was a relatively new movement towards including communication training, right? How do we interview patients, and having any curricular space for that at all. But more and more, I think we really need to be mindful of how we communicate with people. I hear it all the time from patients when they bring their lab reports to me, right? And they say, and they can see it in color now because it's on their smartphone, or it's on their computer, and they can see in the portal, this is highlighted in yellow and it's red and it's got an exclamation mark next to it. So what's wrong with me? Why is my BUN, what's happening, right? My BUN's elevated. And that sends a message, right? The way we set up our systems sends a message, and we need to be the translators for that, and to be able to put things into context for people so that they're not, so that they can use the information the way it's intended rather than the way it's actually being delivered to them. We need to be better with delivery.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, there's no part of a lab report in any system I've ever seen that it ever says, congratulations, you're healthy, or yay, you. Never. And we know, unfortunately, that's missing in a lot of consultations between patients and their healthcare providers, mostly because healthcare providers, even if they're nice folks, and even if they have communication skills, often are really good at problem solvers. So they're looking for problems, right? And so we see that all the time where, wait a minute, just stop for a moment and say, your patient's had a goal, they've succeeded. Look, can we just take a moment and say, yay, you, before we then point out to, well, it looks like you have some postprandial highs we should talk about.
When we get compliments, when we achieve that big goal, whatever it is, we're excited. That's a great point. We're getting toward the end of our podcast, but Bill, I'd be interested in your thoughts. Part of achieving goals, and we opened this with this idea, is also recognizing that we're sometimes not going to achieve our goals. We're going to be disappointed. What do you recommend as an approach? We've talked about having outcome goals, having behavioral goals, intrinsic motivation. So we've done all that, and now we embark and we're moving forward. And, most of us, when we move forward, we have to avoid somehow getting discouraged when we don't fully achieve what we set out to do. How do we deal with that as we're bringing our discussion to a close? I think that becomes a critical issue for people.
That's a really good issue. I think I can tell you one way we deal with that, and I'd like to deal with that personally, I hope you would as well, is anytime you're setting yourself on a new behavioral task, like let's say, Dr. Skolnik decides he wants to start lifting weights in the new year. I always say to my patients, we should think about these as home experiments. And that if that home experiment fails and you discover at the end of January that, wow, as a matter of fact, I never lifted any weights, and that so much for this year, that's, as with any experiment, that has just given us incredibly valuable information that what you'd set up to do didn't work. And hopefully if you have someone to talk to about it, we can figure out together what didn't work. So the next goal is going to be better. It may be that you don't feel like lifting weights, or you decided to do it at a fitness center that's too far away from you, or it's hard to find time in your busy schedule. All these things are fixable, but anything that feels like quote unquote failure is just providing us with information about how we can do a better job next time. So I think that's how we should be talking about it for ourselves and with our patients as well.
I always like that idea to talk to yourself like a friend, kind of saying what you are, Bill, along those lines. There's a quote from Bruce Lee that I really like that says, "Don't speak negatively about yourself, even as a joke. Your body doesn't know the difference." So it's incredible to think about what you internalize when you have those challenges. There have certainly been times I haven't met a goal and given myself a hard time for it, but I wouldn't do that to a friend. So reframing how we think about that is so important. Neil?
Yeah, no, I do think it is. And I love the ideas of reframing something not as failure, but as a stepping stone that we learn from in order to achieve more and more success along the way. We're about out of time. Sean, I wonder if you would like to share any final thoughts for our listeners.
Sure. I think it's been wonderful to listen to this conversation, to be part of it. When people have trouble having achieved goals, I think reframing is important. And one of the things I like to always let people know is that I still see that there's a path forward. We just need to find the right path. Maybe choosing that goal that wasn't achieved wasn't the right path. Let's change our path a little bit, because there's still definitely a way forward.
Love that. Bill, any last thoughts you'd like to share?
Well, I think you've heard from me enough. I'm just delighted to be with you all, and I'm delighted to be having this conversation, and to know that, we come from a place of respecting the people who are listening and with us now, because we know that, as I've always like to say, everyone would prefer to live a long and healthy life, and they're all trying to figure out ways in which they can take action to do that and make sense for them. And our job is to support them as best we can. And talking about goal setting is one way to do that.
Sarah, your thoughts?
Well, I know not everyone here listening or in our group here today are New Year's goal setters, but I'm feeling extra inspired to get going on my New Year's goals this year. And I really like that idea that you had, Bill, of thinking of that feedback loop. I mean, I think about ways to do that more consistently throughout the year, so it's not just a once a year, end of the year time frame when I get to reward myself for making progress.
Yeah, by the end of June, you should have 12 and a half books read, Sarah.
Yes. And if I'm on track, I'm going to reward myself.
Because it's a marathon, not a race.
Exactly.
And Sean, that is so important, because to bring our discussion to close, and you've said that a couple of times, and I'm so glad that you did. When we set goals, particularly when it's about our health, and it is a marathon, it is not a sprint, and we are never perfect. To forgive ourselves our imperfections, to think about those large outcome goals. Bill, I love the term that you used, intrinsic motivation. If we can tap into that, it makes it so much easier to then feel motivated to continue to go after our goals. And it's about continuing. It's about recognizing that each time we fail, we don't fail. We have the opportunity to analyze it and use that as a learning step for our future successes, because life is this ongoing set of learnings that get us closer to where we want to be. Bill Polonsky, Sean Oser, I thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be with you. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks very much.
And Sarah, as always, it is a pleasure to co-host this with you.
Yes. Happy New Year. We'll continue a great year ahead.
And most importantly, of course, is our audience. You've been with us over the last year. We're now entering into a new year. We invite you to engage in our conversation, share with us goals, ideas, thoughts. If you'd like to leave us a message, the phone number is 703-755-7288. Feel free to share with us things you'd like us to share with others. We're excited next month to start a new series focused on weight management. Join us next month for the first episode in this three-part series. For the American Diabetes Association, I'm Dr. Neil Skolnik. Thanks for joining us.